Hello, I made a fun little Easter animation and I thought I'd show a little bit of a making of. Modeling was pretty simple and mainly involved collecting together a bunch of quad spheres. Now, you can create quad spheres in a number of ways, but I've found one of the fastest ways is to use one of the extra mesh options, which is an add-on native to Blender, extra objects, sorry, where you can just add round cube and then use the operator preset quad sphere. And then once I had these spheres together, it was just a case of going in and adjusting them, usually with the proportional edit tool to create the right shapes. The UI elements as well sort of lent heavily on an orthographic camera and were built within Blender itself, using it as more of a vector creation tool, I suppose, just by insetting and extruding and then painting the colors with the vertex paint option, and usually just selecting by hitting L on the keyboard and then setting a color and then hitting fill. And then this was set up in the material just with the attribute node color plugged in and adjusted ever so slightly after the fact. The background glows were just spherical gradient textures that were plugged in via a gamma node just to tweak the fall off a little bit into the alpha of an emission with everything else blacked out or removed. And the materials for the material and the material palette swatches here were, I guess, almost a faux material. It was again a linear texture this time, but using a color ramp with shading and a mid-tone and a highlight just to mimic a diffuse and specular kind of look. And the eyes, if we jump back out here and select an eye, the eyes were just using a color ramp, again with a linear gradient, so things could be adjusted to taste via the gradient ramp, which was plugged into just the base color. And these transitioned to these exploding balloon pop eyes, which have an additional node flow here. And this is just a Voronoi texture plugged into a greater than math node, which is animating with some slight noise offset for the UV input here. And that just creates this sort of balloon pop mask. The textures for the eggs themselves were created in an iPad app called Pixaki, I think that's how it's pronounced, and exported as a PNG, super low resolution, and brought back into Blender with the closest option in the texture interpolation to avoid the smearing and blurring you would get with such a low resolution texture. The bunny, the early stages of the bunny, was just a wireframe, which was created using the wireframe modifier, and that was just an emissive material, really simple. Until the material swatch gets dragged on and dropped, and then it turns into a very fluffy bunny. And the hair strands just got simplify on at the moment. The hair was set up quite simply. It was just creating hair particles, adjusting the length to taste, then using hair dynamics, playing out the frame a little bit just so it gets this sort of nice relaxed look based on gravity, and then using an add-on that I purchased called Dynamic Grooming, which just enables you to, after you've updated the particle list, to, under the dynamics options, apply that state and then go ahead and further add adjustments via the particle edit mode. And then, of course, going in and adding interpolated children and playing around with all the settings, basically, adding some clumping and stuff like that. The scene was lit with emissive polys, which give a nice fall off and enable a sort of hotspot in the middle of what would be a large diffuser here, which gives a nice kind of fall off, as well as the sort of 2 points of highlight in the eyes, giving it that extra cute kind of shimmer. The rig was pretty simple. Some bones set up to control the bunny, as well as a few control bones as well. So some for where the bunny looks, so it can look around and track the cursor, and others for a little bit of secondary animation on the whiskers here, with the addition of the wiggle bone add-on, which just adds some inertia. This is baked in here, as you can see, so you can't really see the options here, but that just automatically adds some nice inertia. And with that bunny rig, I animated an action of the bunny, basically the eyes getting bigger and all of the other elements getting smaller. And then that action was played out based on a constraint, an action constraint, which looked at this controller bone, the Y location of this controller bone. So if that was increased, the action would play from frame 0 to frame whatever. So in effect, there was like a live slider for doing the cuteness. This bone up here just had a noise modifier on the channel, and this just shook about like this throughout the whole thing, and was used to reference, and this motion was used by the controller bone. In the influence channel here, it was just a driver that said to look at the Y location of this wiggle bone and affect the influence. So in effect, what it does is it shakes the action, so the cursor, when it's being slid, is sort of doing this at the same time in the timeline, just to give it that shimmering, immediately compressed, nearly going to burst kind of effect. Okay, and all of that was, again, set up to look through an orthographic camera and using cycles to export things. Just show you the render options here. 1024 by 1024, 1024 samples as well, with a modest noise threshold, no denoising, just because it sort of mucked up the fur a little bit. And that was exported to half float multi EXR and imported via another scene. So if we just jump over, and this is the comp scene, which basically just imports that frame range and spits it out to an MP4 file. And then that MP4 file was brought into yet another newly created scene called Edit, so as to drag in and tweak some sound design. So let's see. Yep. And all of those sounds were sourced, or most of the sounds, sorry, were sourced from the amazing freesound.org website. And as always, if you would like access to these files, they are available via the Patreon in the link in the description, as well as a few other places, again linked in the description. And let me know if this inspires any of your projects, or just stay in touch here at my Twitter address. Thanks as always to the magical Patreon folk, and I'll see you soon.